Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Hi, it's Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. And today we're going to be talking with Matt Lesser, who is the founder and CEO of Uniquely Normal, which exists to build healthy, engaged, and flourishing teams, who in turn build flourishing organizations. Matt has facilitated and trained leaders, teams, and boards of directors in dozens of countries on 6 continents for over 2 decades. He has served in various C-suite roles in private equity, banking, and the commercial uniform industry. He's also launched and operated several businesses in the Midwestern petroleum industry, and his greatest treasures in life are his faith, his wife, and his 3 children. Matt, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Glad to be here.
I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. It's a subject near and dear to my heart, is building healthy and well-organized teams that perform better. You probably know the opening sentences to Pat Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It goes something like this: it's not finance, it's not strategy, it's not technology, but it's people that are the ultimate competitive advantage. And that's like one of my most often quoted phrases or statements out of a book, because it's so true, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you do and why what you do matters so much.
Yeah, great question. First, thank you so much for having me on, Jonathan. I've been looking forward to this time. And let me just start out by, sharing about why I'm passionate about this. It actually started back when I had my own business. And as it grew and expanded, I began to examine and look at business differently. And I began to realize that, it was kind of like what you just quoted from Pat Lencioni. It doesn't really matter the strategy you have. If you don't have a very good program or a very good idea on how to work with people, especially how to develop them, give them opportunities to learn, to grow, and treat them like people, then you don't have a very sustainable model. As I work with leaders over the last 20 or 30 years, one of the conversations we often have is that it's about people, right? Organizations are people, and organizations sell to customers who are people. And it's because of what you sell, you make profit off of that. It's all about people, right? And that profit then pays for the people that you have. But we lose sight of that along the way. And I understand why. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. You just get so caught up into the strategic planning and the budgeting. And all of a sudden, people go from real people to a line item that says FTE or whatever it might be. And so for me, it's all about people. And making organizations realize and leaders realize the importance of people. It's a cliche now. It's really easy to say that people are our greatest asset. Oh, really? And let me look at your financial statements and let me understand how much you're investing in your people. And why is it that every time there's a downturn or there's an inflationary period, kind of like we're in right now, Why is it that the first things that often get cut are investments in people? Because I think we have an improper prioritization on what is at the core of what organizations do. And I think a lot of this happened when early in my career, I took over a family business that was really struggling. I wasn't aware of it at the time, and it failed. And in the first 90 days, with me at the helm, I just discovered major problem after major problem to the point that it could not sustain itself. And I went through a deep suicidal depression and then was removed from the business for about 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, actually. And it was during that time when I was out that I did a whole lot of soul searching, a whole lot of introspection, and began to, I guess, look at business and look at life differently and realize what it really is about people. And that's been a theme of my existence, I guess, ever since then.
And it's a theme, I think, of any business's existence is people. It's an interesting side note, by the way, that why aren't people listed on the balance sheet as an asset? Right? You put your inventory.
I love that.
Right?
I love that.
You put your working capital, you put your cash, but you don't put your asset of your people. And in a service business, more than any other business, that's the main asset. Your main asset walks out the door every single day. And you better hope. I mean, you plan on them coming back the next day. But what is it that you do that actually keeps them coming back? And more importantly, I think the question for most entrepreneurs is, how do you create a culture in a company that is so dynamic, so exciting, so impassioned, so leading edge that people want to come from far away to work for your company? That people have heard about your company and said, I've heard this is a great company to work for. It's not often that small businesses get that reputation, and family businesses in particular get the reputation that they're good to their family members, which they treat their employees as family members. So the loyalty, I am sure that the data would show that members of family businesses last longer, have more years of tenure in a family business than other businesses. Because they treat them more like family. But it doesn't mean that they do things right. It doesn't mean that they have a good onboarding, a good hiring, a good selecting, recruiting.
Right.
So there's a lot of work to be done out there. And people like you and I, we need to lead the charge here. I'm sure you agree.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I think to your point, especially with generational businesses, if there is a robust process for succession planning and for handing off the reins of the business, that's one thing. When you have subsequent generations that take over the business out of almost a sense of entitlement, that's where you see generational businesses that begin to struggle second and third generations because they were not a part of the process of that business starting up, struggling at the beginning, and really understanding the core intent of why this business existed from a founder perspective. And I think that's why the famous saying of rags to riches to rags in 3 generations. Because it has to be intentional.
Exactly. Yeah. So I haven't heard it rags to riches to rags. I've heard it shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. But I think listeners understand what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about some of the things that you do, that I do, to help build healthy teams. And I'll have you go first. What's 1 or 2 things that you do that you think, silver bullet or not, it works really well with building healthy teams?
Yeah. So a couple of things that for me are non-negotiables whenever I work with a new leadership team. The first is that I get them in a room, and I prefer to have it off-site because there's less opportunity for disruption. But if it can't be, that's fine. But I get the team in a room, and then I ask them one question, and that is, share your story. And I don't mean the Cliff's Notes version. I mean the full-on story. I want to understand who you are and how you got to be who you are today. Jonathan, I have heard stories last 15 minutes. I've heard them last an hour.
Wow.
And I'm fine with that. I don't care how long it takes. And I will tell the leader that let's just say it's a leadership team of 5 or 7, I'll say, hey, we're going to block out half the day and we're going to accomplish one thing. And it's one of those things I often get this look like, okay, what are you doing, man?
Right.
This is not.
That's
But
great. We need to talk about strategy. We need to talk about cash. We got things to do. I mean, we're going to talk about our story for a half a day. Are you crazy?
Yeah.
What?
And I have yet to have any of those leaders come back to me and say that was a waste of time.
Yeah.
In fact, it's usually the opposite. They'll say, that was unbelievable. He said, I can't believe that we didn't do this before now. What is shared, then what that does is that builds a deep sense of understanding, of empathy, of bonding at a level that you just can't get it elsewhere. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is I really encourage teams to use assessments. And I know assessments can get a bad rap, and I understand why, because I've had a front row seat to them when they're used unhealthily. But if you use them in a very healthy way, it helps bring insights into people. What motivates them? What are their preferences? How do they prefer to communicate? What's a better way to communicate? How do they handle conflict? How do they decide? And when you have opportunity to work with the team and help unpack these, it brings, again, additional insight, additional perspective, and additional opportunity to build more team cohesiveness, more team loyalty and bonding together.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. As a matter of fact, when I would do my offsites, I would start, usually they would be the 3 days, 2 or 3 days to kick them off. Yep. And we would do a half day using just DISC alone, not even the values and motivators or whatever, the why of what you do and behave the way you do, but just the what's your behavioral preference or profile. And people found that stuff so valuable, so engaging, so entertaining. And so it was curious. Like, I spent 15 minutes filling out this exercise that seemed kind of nonsensical, and it nailed me. Like, how did that happen? Like I didn't even, I was just making up answers at the end of this thing. So it's pretty interesting. Assessments and story, and letting them tell their story. And along that line, one of the tools that is popular in the entrepreneur organization community is the lifeline exercise. I'm sure you're familiar with it, where you basically draw out like your lifeline, the highs and the lows, and what was the learning lessons, which sounds like it's what you're doing in your story exercise. So powerful to build that kind of empathy. And since I mentioned Pat Lencioni in the beginning of this call or recording today, is he talks about that as one of the trust building exercises, which is do either Myers-Briggs or DISC and get to really know each other. It's so important to build that trust, to understand that we don't all think the way I do or the way you do, and we don't behave and act that way. Super important in growing our awareness of ourselves and awareness of others.
Absolutely. And that's where I have seen both story and assessments used in such a powerful way. Again, I've also seen them used as weapons that have been very destructive. Yeah. And usually it's with an inexperienced somebody that's not been trained. And they'll use language like, you're this, and so therefore you can't do that, or you have a lid on you. And literally when I hear that, my mind wants to explode. But I have had very many experiences like you talked about, where people come up afterwards and say, oh my goodness, how this thing nailed me so accurately. And those aha moments that's gold, man. That's just gold.
So let's dive into that a little bit deeper, because I haven't heard so much the bad rap that assessments get. But I think that some people gravitate to it and some people don't. And in my own career, and I've been working with the Target Training International and their DISC assessments for 15 years, plus or minus, there have been times where I thought I didn't really need it, because it was pretty obvious to me what someone's type was, and putting a label and putting a mark around it wasn't necessary. And there were teams of people that I found were super engaged, super intuitive, especially families. And they didn't need such an assessment type of thing. But there were others who had trouble reading other people. They maybe weren't as high on the EQ, emotional intelligence scores. And so it really helped them. But it was hit and miss. There were people who liked it and thought this is enormously helpful. There were people who said this is pseudoscience, and I find this is not that useful. And then there are people who just glazed over. And it was like, we got work to do. Like, I don't have time to get into a 47-page assessment on my style.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've experienced similar things, I take it.
I have. Yeah. And it's those people, I think, that have had some experience with assessments that have not necessarily seen the value and the benefit of it. They're more difficult to try to convince, hey, listen, this is actually an effective tool and it can really help you and your team. And here's how.
Yeah.
And at that point, then it becomes almost like a prove it to me kind of a thing. But it's, yeah, you're right. There have been people that have had more pushback, I think, than others.
And look, there are things that I don't do, maybe you don't do, that you and I would probably see as much value in. And these like trust building exercises where it might be physical outdoor types of activities where you're working together to see how you work together as a team. For example, climbing one of those military walls. How does a team work together? Do they work together? Do they leave the last man standing or last woman standing? How do they work together in trust falling type exercises? Or how do you process an issue? Do you process an issue? If something was said that seemed upsetting to someone else, do you just sweep it under the rug? Do you process it? Do you over process it? I mean, all these things I think are important skills for us as facilitators to be aware of and to shine light on. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And I think you just brought up something very important, Jonathan, and that is the importance of flexibility and the importance of being able to pivot wherever the group needs to go. Oftentimes, when I'm working with a team, especially the new team, I rarely give a pre-prescribed path of we're going to do this, then this. Instead, what I'll do is I'll give an overview of the journey of, okay, we're going to go from here to there. And how we get from here to there, I don't know, but we're going to get from here to there. And along the way, we are going to focus on 3 major areas, and they are empathy, empowerment, and excellence. And in each of those buckets, if you will, there are different exercises, there are different practices, there are different applications that we are going to explore as a team. I'm not going to say we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, because we may start with excellence and then we may move to empowerment, or we may start with empowerment and then move to empathy. I don't know. The important thing is that let's start where the immediate felt pain is, and then we can gravitate from there.
Empathy, empowerment, excellence. How did you settle in on these 3? Is there a 4th or a 5th E? What was it unique about these 3 and how they blend together for you?
Yeah, great question. Just came out of, again, years of working with leaders and trying to understand what separates engaged and excited teams versus unengaged and unexcited teams. What separates teams that are excited about going to work every day versus those that absolutely dread going to work every day. And so it's just working with different leaders, different teams, and lots of research and interviews and understanding, okay, what is the difference in culture? There was a study done in 2019. I just came across it a couple of weeks ago, actually, and it's going to make its way into my second book about what the actual quantified cost of a toxic culture is in organizations. And I had not seen this before.
Wow.
And so 2 researchers, and their names are escaping me right now, so I'm really sorry. I wish I had the names top of my head. Looked at 3 types of cultures: toxic, average, if you will, and then healthy. And a toxic culture cost on average 40% of a employee's productivity per year. And the average,
by the way,
what's that?
I'm not surprised by that data.
Me either. And my gut told me it was probably 50%. So I was glad to see that it was somebody had quantified it at 40%.
Yeah.
And the actual dollar amount per employee per year of a toxic culture is about 14 grand, which actually I think is low.
I think that's really low. Yeah. I mean, Gallup has done some interesting research around this because I used it in one of my video sales letters. It's still on my website, actually. And what do you think about using Gallup Q12 employee engagement surveys or employee net promoter scores? Do you believe it's important for companies to develop an internal benchmark and then measure against themselves periodically using these types of instruments? I mean, is this part of your practice?
So I have used Q12 before. I've been a part of an organization that used it. I led the charge in using it, and it's a great tool. And you say this to every organization I work with. A tool is only as effective as authentically you allow the tool to be. I've seen way too many organizations try to manipulate data, try to manipulate responses in order to try to either say the problem isn't as big as we think it is, or it's not that big of a deal, or hey, we just caught them on a bad day. And so whatever tool is used, and Q12 is a good tool, is used, as long as it is authentic and it is transparent, then I don't have a problem with it. And I think that some kind of tool should be used. I prefer to sit one-on-one with as many employees as possible, especially leaders in organizations, and just have a conversation and to try to get to understand as much as I can about, okay, how is the culture of this organization really? How is it from your point of view?
I think that's really interesting. So when I first started my consulting career as a solo practitioner outside of an organization that I was involved in building for 10 years, I got certified by a company called Virtual CEO, later became Quad Red. And these guys had developed a tool for collecting data from all the employees on things like strategy and culture and vision, mission, all sorts of stuff, and not to avoid those one-on-ones, which was very interesting. I love the way they gathered the data, but you're still using what we would call maybe old-fashioned belly to belly, face to face. And I mean, I think there's a value in both. If you're collecting a lot of data from a large body of people, you can't possibly do one-on-ones, but
no.
The quality of the information you get in a one-on-one, it's empowering also to the individual that you're having that one-on-one with, because they feel like their voice mattered, as opposed to if they fill out a survey instrument, they might think like, they're collecting this data so they can figure out what normative behavior ought to be or what we should be doing. It doesn't feel like my voice mattered as much. So kudos to you for doing that.
For me, it's important. And as a result of that, obviously, I kind of limit the size of the organization that I have been working with. And I'm okay with that, quite frankly. But to your point, surveys to me are fine. And Q12 is one of them. Again, it depends upon how authentic and transparent the feedback is. If an employee feels like, hey, listen, the data they asked for on the front end, especially the demographic data, what department are you part of, what position, or this and this. I mean, it can become too easy, especially in smaller organizations, to pinpoint and say, oh, wow, yeah, that's Frank in the art department. And oh man, he's had a axe to grind on us for years. So just throw that survey out. And when that crap starts happening, it's not authentic data. It's not good data.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, so let's switch gears here. Let's talk about how technology has changed people's lives. There's some, and also remote working, how it's changed. And let me just queue up with a few comments and then I'll turn it over to you. So technology allows us to be always connected, almost no matter where we are, unless you're in the jungle. And I recently was, and the technology was actually not very good in the jungle. I was down in Tulum, Mexico for a week, and you literally don't have connectivity unless you are connected to the Wi-Fi at a hotel or at a restaurant. And that's not too uncommon. But also with COVID and this whole shift, people working remotely, there's a real bleeding of your time into your personal time. And it's almost like it's difficult to separate personal from professional time. Like literally I was away out of the country for 5 weeks and I was mostly connected, but detached. And had I partners, employees, it might have felt invasive at times. And so how do we prioritize and manage and balance technology with our ability, gives us the freedom to be anywhere, but also keeps us plugged in at all times? And in terms of building healthy teams, this is a really important issue, is being mindful of proper boundaries. I know I'm just kind of spitballing some stuff out at you, but I think you know where I'm trying to go with this. Help me out. What are your thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, and I have a lot of thoughts on this subject. Yeah, I think that with the advent of the invention of the smartphone and having access to people 24/7, I think that at first it was a novelty, right? It was, oh, wow, I can get my email at home. I can get text messages 24/7. And so I think what has happened, and I think COVID actually revealed some of this, is that being accessible 24/7, 365 is not healthy. And there needs to be boundaries in place, healthy boundaries put in place. And I've worked with too many leaders at this point that have the mindset of, they don't have to respond right away. I'm thinking about it. And so I don't want to have to write it down or send it later. So I just send it.
Right. Very common.
And those, it is. And those are the conversations where I say, no, you don't understand. You're the leader, you're the owner, you're the president of the company, whatever, or you're this person's boss. There's an emotional obligation that occurs inside the other person where they feel like they don't have a choice. Now, the boss could say till they're blue in the face, they do have a choice, And so in the organizations that I'm working with, I'm trying to actually help them rewrite that narrative and say, no, boss, leader, owner, it's your responsibility to protect your people. Put into place boundaries. Listen, phones are on at 7:30 in the morning. They're off at 5:30 at night. There's no email. There's no text messages. And we're going to be disciplined about that, or whatever time period makes sense for you. On weekends, if you have to have access on the weekend, say, hey, listen, from 8 to noon on Saturday, fine, it's fair game. But the rest of the weekend, no access at all. And in my own personal life, I've had to put boundaries in place to say, okay, listen, Sundays, phones are off, no access. Sundays are my day. That's my Sabbath. It's my day that I am not going to be connected to work. And then once a quarter, I go away for 3 days and my phone is off all 3 days. The first time I started doing this, it was nerve-wracking. The first time I did it was nerve-wracking because, like, oh my gosh, the world's going to fall apart. My kid's going to have an accident, whatever it's going to happen. The world didn't fall apart. Right. And now I look forward to those 3 days every quarter.
I bet.
And I think that helping organizations understand that just because you provide a cell phone or a smartphone to your employees, or a laptop they can take home, doesn't mean that you have access to them 24/7. You need to respect the work week as if we were back in 1990 when we didn't have any of the technology that we had today. And it's difficult.
I think that's really well said. So let's take it to the family and the family business and setting boundaries for family members. So they come home after work, maybe as a family, or maybe they get together. Let's just take it Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever the holiday that they're celebrating together, Thanksgiving. Should they keep it just personal and not have any discussion around the family and the family business, and business issues? I mean, should there be those kind of boundaries? Is that a healthy boundary? Like, where do families draw the line in terms of boundaries? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. When I had my family business, it was way too easy. And my mom worked for me. And it was way too easy for us to, as my little brother, come to think of it. So it was way too easy for us as a family at Thanksgiving, at Christmas, at whatever, that we'd get caught up as a family. And then the conversation would morph to, actually, so did my stepdad, who was married. Anyway, so a lot of family involved.
Right.
So the conversation would naturally gravitate toward business. What would happen is that anybody who is not involved in the business, my wife, my kids, my other brother, and my other family members, they would just feel lost. They'd get frustrated. And so we had to get to the place of say, okay, at the dinner table, this is a business-free zone. And we even put a policy in place where we put fines that if somebody said something about business, they were fined. And it went into this general fund for the family that we gave away to a charity. But anyway, and I think that other families need to really consider that. Otherwise, what happens is there's no break from the business. And then you have other family members that begin to get frustrated and they get exhausted because it's always work. It's always business. And so, if there's something that is a crisis that's going on over Thanksgiving or over Christmas, fine. Schedule a time. Say, okay, listen, from We're going to have lunch from 12 to 2:30. There's no business involved, but at 2:45, we'll go into a separate room for 15 minutes, half an hour. We'll talk business, but then it's right back out. Once the doors open again, no business involved.
Yeah. Matt, what are your thoughts around building healthy teams where the team is mostly remote? They're in different time zones, they're in different countries, states, or some are in the office, and then the rest are scattered in other places. I mean, do you have some experience in this area where you help them put in place processes, practices, best habits?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, and I think it's a growing challenge. And it's something that I think was in the periphery prior to 2020, and now it's become, I think, more mainstream. And I think it requires even more intentionality, that if we're going to have an organization that values people, that values relationships, that values healthy culture, then we have to have opportunities where, listen, we're going to have a team meeting, and for the first half an hour, we're just going to share about our lives. We're going to share a story. You can do assessment debriefs on Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever platform you choose to use. But it requires intentionality. And I think that what I have observed in organizations I've worked with that have primarily remote is it becomes strictly business. We're going to schedule this call. It's a meeting. We'll talk about this. Okay, boom, off the call. And I think there's more disconnect. I think that what we're seeing is a lot more functional relationships, task-oriented relationships, versus when you're in office with somebody, you can develop more personal.
Yeah. Have you seen any creative uses of Zoom or Teams or whatever for, okay, we're having a water cooler or a lunch meeting, or we're going to have a coffee break? I have not been involved in meetings like that, but it's so apparent to me that these are needed. Those conversations around the water cooler and the coffee break or lunchroom, how do we recreate that in a remote environment to build health in our team?
Yeah, that's great. And a friend of mine, he calls them coffees with Tom, and they literally schedule a half hour to an hour, depends on what you want to chat about. And during those coffees together, you may talk about business or your work or your job, but the intent of it is, listen, I want to get to know my coworker outside of the context of work. So I think there's stuff like that. I know of organizations that they'll have virtual lunch and learns where they'll eat their lunches while he's sharing. It might be an outside person who's sharing some new technique or new tool, or it could be an inside team member that's just sharing some new revelations in their life, what they're learning, what they're growing about. But I think it's important. Again, it comes down to the word intentionality. And I think that's what it's going to take for organizations, especially that continue to be remote. If they want to have a healthy and connected and engaged organizational culture, they're going to have to be even more intentional than those that are face-to-face.
So true. So something that popped up in the news a few months ago, but it's still something that I chuckle about, was Elon Musk says, you guys can work from home as much as you like, but you have to work 40 hours in the office. And it was like, that just went viral on the internet. It's an interesting concept. And it's hard to argue with his success, which is that he has believed that people who work together, and it makes sense, certainly in a production environment, manufacturing environment, there's a lot of companies that you literally have to get together, right? You're in the commercial uniform industry and in the petroleum industry. Like, you're not doing virtual uniform distribution. It's physical, face-to-face. It's got to be cleaned. It's got to be shipped. It's got to be delivered, fulfilled. So it's interesting concepts. Are teams healthier because when they get together physically, even without that intentionality, because it's easier to fulfill that, building a healthier team because they're getting together?
Yeah, you asked some really good questions, Jonathan, and this is one of them. So,
I make them up as I go along.
You do a great job of it.
Thanks.
I think that time is going to have to bear that one out. My personal bias is, I think face-to-face is still superior.
Yeah.
I think if building relationships is important and having relational relationships, not just functional relationships, is important, then I think that organizations have got to find a way to get people face to face. There's only so much you can do with this kind of technology.
Right.
Now, I can build a relationship with you doing this.
Yes.
But there's something that happens face to face, I think, that doesn't happen otherwise.
Understood.
Yep.
Understood. All right, Matt, tell us about your first book and tell us about the second book that's coming out. What's the title of the first book and what's it about?
Sure. First book is called UnSatisfied, When Less is More. It came out in October of this last year, 22. Mm-hmm. And it's a book that I started thinking about 10 years ago, actually, when I was in the trenches working with leaders and evaluating businesses when I was in private equity, literally all over the world. And I began to see a trend that I believe is a pattern. And that is these leaders, oftentimes of family businesses, they would work their entire lives and they would sacrifice oftentimes time, relationships with their spouse, with their kids to build this thing, right? And they'd reach a point of success where they'd have discretionary income. They'd have maybe the lake house, maybe the boat, whatever you define as success. And they get to this point of saying, what? This is it? Their sense of dissatisfaction, their sense of being unsatisfied, their sense of frustration with life of, I can't believe I sacrificed everything for this. And I saw that time and time and time again. And so I began to write about it. And over the course of about 5 years, then it developed into this model called the Flourishing Life Model. It's in the book that talks about the progression from diminishing, then to surviving, to thriving, to flourishing. And this was the progression that I saw in some of these leaders that I worked with that kind of got stuck at the thriving level and really became disillusioned with life. And so what is beyond thriving? What's next? And flourishing came out of that. So
good for you. And tell us about the second book.
Second book is just finished the manuscript. So just starting now the editing process. And the working title is called Unengaged, Building Flourishing Organizations. And it's building on the first book, but it's really unpacking how do you build engaged, excited teams? How do you build a flourishing organization? And it goes back to the 3 words that I mentioned earlier: empathy, empowerment, and excellence. And how do you develop these in organizations in a practical? Both books have, I didn't want just conceptual philosophical books. I wanted practical applications and exercises that can be implemented in organizations to really make a difference. So the first one was focused more on individual lives and leaders. The second one focused on just individual lives. The second one focused on organizational life. And again, I use the Flourishing Life model also in the second book, but adapted to organizational life. And I'm super excited about the first one. I am super excited about the second one for many reasons.
Oh, that's fantastic. And last question, why uniquely normal? What is uniquely normal?
Uniquely normal. So 2 words that don't fit together, but I love that. I love the tension and the dichotomy that comes with that. It just came from thinking about what in working with organizations, working with leaders, they're all trying to solve problems that they think are unique to them. They think that I have this problem. Nobody understands. It's lonely at the top. The things that you all hear from leaders, we've all heard from leaders, and they think that's unique, but it's not.
Normal.
It's normal.
Okay.
It is absolutely normal. And so that's where uniquely normal came from. So
that's fabulous. Hey, Matt, it's been great spending this 40 or so minutes with you. I'm sure you have a dynamic and exciting and interesting program that you offer. What is it that you would like to be able to share with listeners as a way to contact you, a way to learn more, a takeaway, maybe something about your book? How would you like people to engage with you?
Yeah, that's great. My website is www.uniquelynormal.com. All one word, uniquelynormal.com. And on there, you'll find my way to contact me. My email is matt@uniquelynormal.com. And my book is available on Amazon. And I'm also available on LinkedIn. Other than that, I don't have a lot of social media. I have LinkedIn, and that's all I have. So it's Matthew Lesser in LinkedIn. So look forward to connecting with anybody who would like to connect.
Sounds good. All right, folks. So hopefully you found this show helpful to you in thinking about how to build a healthy, engaged organization. I'm sure you can reach out to Matt or myself for assessments in these areas or some input or feedback. And if you like this show, you know the drill. tell others about it, share it, give us a great rating on your podcast listening app of choice, and stay tuned for future episodes of the Disruptive Successor Show. Thanks. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.